the river goddess who became my everything. Let me tell you about the day my life changed forever. It wasn't anything dramatic, no car crash, no lottery win, nothing that would make the news. It was just an ordinary evening by a river. But that's the thing about life, it has a funny way of sneaking up on you when you least expect it. I had just moved to the city. The plan was simple: get a job, work hard, save money, and prove to myself, and everyone back home, that I could make it on my own. But life in the city wasn't what I'd imagined. It was fast-paced, cold, and impersonal. The days blurred together, and I felt like I was just existing. That evening, I decided to clear my head. I'd heard about a quiet spot on the outskirts of the city where a river cut through a patch of woods. It sounded peaceful, like the kind of place I needed. I got there just as the sun was setting. The river was beautiful, its surface shimmering gold in the fading light. The air was cool, carrying the earthy scent of water and grass. I leaned against a tree, soaking it all in, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a little lighter. Then I saw her. At first, I thought it was my eyes playing tricks on me. The water in the middle of the river seemed to shimmer unnaturally, rippling in a way that didn't match the current. Then, from the center of the river, she emerged. She was standing on the water, no, just above it, her feet barely skimming the surface. Her skin glowed faintly, like she'd borrowed the light of the moon. Her long, dark hair cascaded down her back, and her eyes were closed as if she were in deep concentration. She didn't look human. She looked like she belonged to the river, like she was part of it. I froze. I knew I should look away. Whatever this was, it wasn't meant for me. But I couldn't tear my eyes off her. Then, as if sensing my presence, she began to change. Her glow started to fade, softening with each passing moment. Her hair shortened slightly, her features became sharper, more defined. The shimmer of her skin dulled, and the air around her seemed to settle. She was transforming, becoming more human right before my eyes. I didn't mean to speak. The words just spilled out. Do you always make such a dramatic entrance, or am I just lucky today? Her eyes snapped open, and for a moment, she just stared at me. They were the brightest green I'd ever seen, more vivid than emeralds. Her expression was a mix of surprise and curiosity, like she couldn't decide whether to be annoyed or amused. You're not supposed to see this, she said finally, her voice low and melodic. See what? I asked, stepping closer. A woman turning from a goddess into a human. Because that's definitely something you don't see every day. Her lips twitched, and for a second, I thought she might laugh. Most people would have run away by now, she said, tilting her head. Run away? From you? I grinned. Not a chance. You look like you could outshine the sun. This time, she did laugh, a soft, musical sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. You're bold, she said, her eyes narrowing slightly. I'll give you that. I'm just honest, I said, taking another step closer. What's your name? She hesitated, as if deciding whether to tell me. Then she said, Naya. Naya, I repeated, letting the name roll off my tongue. Beautiful name for a beautiful woman. Her eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place, amusement, maybe, or curiosity. Do you always flirt with strangers by the river? Only the ones who look like they stepped out of a dream, I said, flashing a grin. She shook her head, but I could see the small smile tugging at her lips. You're trouble, aren't you? You have no idea, I replied. But what about you, Naya? Who are you, really? You don't exactly seem ordinary. Her smile faltered for a moment, and her gaze drifted to the river. I'm new here, she said finally. New to the city? I asked. New to this, she said, gesturing vaguely to herself. I didn't understand what she meant, but I could tell it was something she didn't want to explain. So I let it go. Well, welcome, I said. You've definitely made an impression. She laughed softly, shaking her head. You're not bad at this, you know. At what? Being charming, she said, a teasing lilt in her voice. Charming? Is that what this is? I asked, smirking. And here I thought I was just being myself. We talked until the sky turned dark and the moon cast its light over the river. She told me she'd come here for a fresh start, though she didn't say from what. I told her about my struggles, trying to adjust to the city, feeling out of place. She listened like no one else ever had, her emerald eyes never leaving mine. By the time we said goodbye, I felt like I'd known her forever. "A woodoo," she said softly as we parted. "Yes. Be careful," she said, her gaze serious. "The world isn't always kind to people like you." "People like me?" I asked, frowning. She just smiled, enigmatic and beautiful. "Good night, a woodoo." I watched her walk away, her silhouette fading into the night, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just met someone extraordinary. The days after meeting Naya felt different. The city didn't seem as cold anymore. I found myself looking forward to my evenings by the river, wondering if she'd show up again. And she did, every time, without fail. It started with simple conversations. She'd ask about my day, and I'd tell her about the chaos at work or the strange characters I encountered on the bus. She never shared much about herself, always skirting around the details of her past. But she listened intently, her emerald eyes fixed on me, and somehow, talking to her made everything feel lighter. The more we talked, the more I noticed how different she was. She had this calm, unshakable presence, like she'd seen the world and wasn't fazed by it anymore. And she knew things no ordinary person could know. Like the time I told her about my landlord hiking up the rent. "Don't worry about it," she said with a small smile. "What do you mean, don't worry about it?" "The guy's a shark. He's been waiting for an excuse to kick me out." She just shrugged. "Trust me." The next day, my landlord called to apologize for the misunderstanding and offered to lower the rent instead. When I told Naya, she just smiled and said, "Sometimes, people just need a little nudge." Then there was the time I was late for work because my bus broke down. I was panicking, knowing my boss wouldn't care about excuses. But when I got to the office, he greeted me with a grin and said, "Good timing. We've just had a last-minute meeting come up." "Did you?" I started to ask Naya that evening. She tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Did I what?" "Never mind," I muttered, though I couldn't shake the feeling that she had something to do with it. The more time we spent together, the more I noticed these little coincidences. Things just seemed to work out when she was around, like she had the power to bend the world to her will. And yet, she never boasted about it. She never even acknowledged it. One evening, as we sat by the river, I couldn't hold back anymore. "Naya," I said, turning to her. "Who are you, really?" She was quiet for a moment, her gaze fixed on the water. Then she sighed. "Do you believe in magic, a woodoo?" I chuckled. "I didn't. Not until I met you." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "I wasn't always like this," she said, her voice soft. "I was tied to the river. A part of it. But I wanted something more. I wanted to experience life the way humans do, to feel, to love, to be free. So I chose to take this form." I stared at her, trying to wrap my head around what she was saying. "So, you're, what? A goddess?" She laughed, shaking her head. "Nothing so grand. Just the river, given shape." I should have been freaked out. I should have run for the hills. But instead, I found myself smiling. "Well, that explains a lot," I said. "Explains what?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "How you always seem to know what's going to happen. How things just work out when you're around. You're like my lucky charm." She looked at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said, "You're not afraid?" "Afraid? Of you?" I grinned. "Not a chance." That was the first time she kissed me. It was soft and tentative, like she wasn't sure if she was doing it right. But the moment our lips met, the world seemed to fade away. There was only her warmth, her scent, her everything. From that moment on, we were inseparable. Their life together. Naya didn't just help me survive the city, she helped me thrive. When my boss started piling extra work on me, she gave me the confidence to stand up for myself. When I was struggling to make ends meet, she showed me ways to stretch every coin. And when I doubted myself, she was always there to remind me of my worth. But it wasn't just what she did for me, it was how she made me feel. With her, life felt lighter, brighter. She had this way of turning even the most mundane moments into something magical. Like the time we got caught in a rainstorm. We were walking back from the river when the skies opened up. I groaned, thinking about how soaked I was going to be, but Naya just laughed and spun in the rain, her arms outstretched. "Come on, Owudu," she called, her laughter ringing through the downpour. I couldn't help but laugh too. I grabbed her hand, and we danced in the rain like a couple of kids. By the time we made it back to my apartment, we were drenched, but I'd never felt so alive. And then there was the time I tried to cook for her. "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" she asked, watching as I fumbled with the ingredients. "Of course," I said, trying to sound confident as I dropped a handful of spices into the pot. The result was questionable, to say the least. But Naya ate every bite, smiling the whole time. "It's unique," she said, her eyes twinkling. "You mean it's terrible?" I said, laughing. "No," she said, leaning over to kiss my cheek. "I mean it's perfect because you made it for me. A love that endured everything." Life with Naya was nothing short of magical. She wasn't just my partner, she was my anchor, my muse, and my greatest ally. But as perfect as it felt to be with her, there was always an unspoken tension hanging between us. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew she was holding something back, something she didn't think I was ready to hear. One evening, as we sat on the couch in my tiny apartment, her head resting on my shoulder, I decided to press her gently. "Naya," I said, my voice soft, "can I ask you something?" "Anything," she replied, though her tone suggested she already knew what I was going to ask. "What happens if you... I mean, if we stay together?" I paused, struggling to find the right words. "You're not exactly human, right? So, does that mean?" She sat up, her emerald eyes meeting mine. There was a sadness in them that made my chest tighten. "Owudu," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "there's something you need to know." I braced myself. "When I chose to take this form, I made a deal," she said. "I was allowed to live as a human, to experience love and life, but only for a time. One day, I'll have to go back. Back to the river." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Go back? You mean, leave?" She nodded, her gaze dropping to her hands. "It's not up to me. It's the price I paid for this life." "How long do we have?" I asked, my throat tight. "I don't know," she admitted. "It could be years. It could be months. The river will call me when it's time." I stared at her, my mind racing. I wanted to argue, to tell her there had to be a way to break the deal, but the look in her eyes stopped me. She wasn't telling me this to scare me, she was telling me because she didn't want to lie to me. "Naya," I said, reaching for her hand. "I don't care how long we have. I'm not going anywhere." Tears welled in her eyes, and she leaned into me, her arms wrapping around my shoulders. "You're going to make this so much harder," she whispered. "Good," I said, holding her close. "Because I'm not letting you go without a fight." The challenges they faced. Life wasn't always easy. The city was a tough place to live, and money was always tight. But with Naya by my side, I felt invincible. When I lost my job after the company downsized, I came home that evening feeling defeated. I slumped onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. "What happened?" Naya asked, kneeling beside me. "They let me go," I muttered. "Said they had to make cuts, and I wasn't essential." Naya cupped my face, forcing me to look at her. "You are essential, Owudu. To me, you're everything." Her words, simple as they were, reignited something in me. With her encouragement, I started looking for new opportunities. She even helped me prepare for interviews, coaching me with her uncanny wisdom. Within weeks, I landed a new job, one that paid better and treated me with respect. But it wasn't just the big challenges she helped me face. It was the little things, too. When I was too tired to cook after a long day, she'd whip up something simple but delicious. When I doubted myself, she reminded me of my worth. And when I felt overwhelmed, she'd pull me close and say, "You've got this, Owudu. I believe in you." Her sacrifices. As much as Naya gave me, I began to notice the toll it took on her. There were days when she seemed tired, her glow dimmer than usual. She assured me she was fine, but I knew better. One night, as we lay in bed, I finally confronted her. "Naya, you're not okay, are you?" I asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She hesitated, then sighed. "Every time I use my power to help you, it takes a little bit of my strength," she admitted. My chest tightened. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I'd do it 1,000 times over if it means you're happy," she said, her voice steady. "You've given me more than I ever dreamed of, Owudu. This life, this love, it's worth everything." I didn't know what to say. All I could do was hold her, vowing silently to cherish every moment we had together. A love that defied time. The years we spent together were the happiest of my life. We built a home filled with laughter and love. We had traditions, Sunday morning pancakes, stargazing on the balcony, and, of course, our evenings by the river. But deep down, I knew our time was running out. One evening, as we sat by the river, Naya turned to me with tears in her eyes. "It's almost time," she said softly. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. "No," I said, shaking my head. "There has to be a way." "There isn't," she interrupted, her voice trembling. "This was always the deal, Owudu. I can't fight it." I pulled her into my arms, my heart breaking. "I love you, Naya," I whispered. "I love you too," she said, her tears soaking my shirt. "More than you'll ever know." That night, we held each other like it was the last time, because we knew it was. Her return. The next morning, Naya walked to the river, her hand clasped tightly in mine. The water shimmered, just like it had the day we met. "This isn't goodbye," she said, turning to me. "How can it not be?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Because I'll always be here," she said, placing a hand over my heart. "As long as you remember me, I'll never really be gone." With one last kiss, she stepped into the water. The light enveloped her, and she was gone. Forever changed. It's been years since that day, but I still feel her with me. Every time I walk by the river, I hear her laughter in the wind and see her reflection in the water. Naya didn't just change my life, she became a part of me. And though she's gone, our love lives on. Because love like ours doesn't fade. It endures, stronger than time, deeper than the river, and brighter than the stars. I'll love her forever.